Leave a sought for that purpose. Is there anyone opposed to that course of action? There is none. Are you seeking a call? Denise Roche?
Mr. Speaker.
Order. No, the member should proceed. Order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to take a short call for the Greens. As you've heard from my colleague Gareth Hughes, we'll be supporting this bill because we believe it does start to address some of the weaknesses in our legislation around protecting our waters from marine disasters that we saw so clearly with the grounding of the Rena. It was an entirely predictable accident, and I think others have mentioned that already, but the deregulation of the 90s that carried on through until today, actually, has resulted in an enormous number of rust buckets ships that are sailing under flags of convenience with foreign crews that are plying their trade around our coasts and in our ports, which are adding to the risk that we have. So it's good to see this government wanting to introduce some regulation at last. It's really good to see the inclusion of the International Maritime Organisation conventions in this bill, although we note that the ones around oil spills and liability for ship owners still don't make them liable for paying the entire costs of clean-ups. We support this bill's intention to amend the Maritime Transport Act to enable better local regulation by local authorities relating to local port and harbour safety. And there's a few things that I'm hoping will come through in the Select Committee, and I'm on the Transport and Industrial Relations Committee as well. There's a couple of gaps. One is that this bill and the EEZ as well, EEZ Bill Act rather, doesn't address the issue of emissions of particulates and CO2 emissions from container ships and cruise ships that are berthing in our cities' harbours. But there is a convention that we might want to sign up to it. That's the International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from Ships. We've got close to it with one of the conventions that's in this bill, but not quite there. It would make sense to adopt some of the regulations that is international best practice now, because Auckland City Council is already saying that there are huge peaks in CO2 emissions from dirty fuel that's used by shipping container ships and cruise ships while they're berthing in Auckland. And the Rugby World Cup last year, which was a great success for our country, but during that time the dangerous emissions that came from dirty fuel from the cruise ships that were berthed there were quite beyond what is normal. We'd also like to see this bill actually take into account some of the other international regulations around speed. Generally, with the beefing up of the local authorities' ability to set some safety and environmental regulations in their own ports, there is still some issues around their ability to set speed of these shipping containers in their harbours. And we've got that situation in the Hauraki Gulf where I live. There is a population of Broodies whales. There are only 250 of them in New Zealand. They're very rare. There's 40 to 50 of them that live in the Hauraki Gulf, and most of them are living and feeding and resting around the shipping lanes. The harbour master has set the speed limit for the area that he controls at 12 knots. However, the ability for a Broodies whale to survive ship strike at 12 knots is pretty limited. It's a much better prospect for them surviving if it's under 12 knots, and it's an even better situation for their survival if it's under 10 knots. The Minister for the Environmental Defence Society has actually worked alongside the Hauraki Gulf Marine Park Forum and the Ministry of Conservation to look at ways that we could be asking the Minister of Transport to start to do some regulations around speed. And I would suggest that since this bill takes into account the fact of driving, shipping those great big container ships under the influence of alcohol, then we should be looking at the speed that those things are going at. Because as we know from the Rena disaster, the faster you go, the bigger the mess. Thank you.
Simon O'Connor.
Mr Speaker, it's my pleasure to stand here and talk to the Marine Legislation Bill. I'm going to be brief, so shall we just dive right in? Mr Speaker, the other side has carped on about this bill, but